القصة هي قصة النهايات السياسية.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm today's top stories. The trash crisis and the presidential deadlock will top the agenda of the National Dialogue session this Wednesday. Parliament Speaker Nabil Berri warns he will suspend his initiative if more than one party decides to boycott talks. French President François Hollande says France will take in 24,000 refugees over the next 2 years and will be visiting Lebanon soon to inspect Syrian encampments and meet with Lebanese officials. And France will launch surveillance flights against Islamic State group positions in Syria as ISIS fighters seize an oil field in the vast desert area of Gaza. French President François Hollande says he will visit Beirut to meet with Lebanese officials and inspect Syrian refugee encampments. Speaking at his biannual press conference, Hollande said his trip to Lebanon will come after the UN General Assembly session in New York later this month. The president said he will travel to Lebanon to visit a refugee encampment and assess the needs of the displaced Syrians. He added the European Commission was preparing to unveil a proposal for mandatory quotas for EU states to relocate 120,000 refugees. European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker will reportedly unveil the proposal on Wednesday. Social Affairs Minister Rachid Delbas says the trash crisis will top the agenda of the National Dialogue session scheduled for Wednesday. He said Agriculture Minister Akram Shayib has reached a flexible solution to the garbage crisis after consultations with environmental groups. Meanwhile, Parliament Speaker Nabil Berri reiterated that the presidential deadlock was the first item on the agenda of the dialogue, warning he will suspend his initiative if more than one party decides to boycott the talks. The heads of the rival parliamentary blocs, Prime Minister Tamam Slam and several other officials are expected to attend the first round of the dialogue. Only the Lebanese forces announced it will boycott the talks. Berri said, however, that the parties supporting the election of a new president and the approval of an electoral draft law should head to parliament meetings rather than boycott them. On another note, Kataeb party leader Sami Jmail has reportedly warned that his party's representatives will suspend their participation in the cabinet if it fails to resolve the waste crisis this week. Lebanese Forces Chief Samir Jaja, accompanied by MP Satrida Jaja, has held talks with the Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani in Doha. Both have discussed the presidential election crisis and the issue of the kidnapped servicemen held hostage by Islamist militants in the northeastern border town of Arsal. Sheikh Tamim promised that Qatar will continue its efforts to secure their release. A statement issued by the Lebanese forces says the two sides also discussed the situation in Lebanon and the region and underlined the need to elect a new president as soon as possible. Jaja and Sheikh Tamim also agreed that the war in neighboring Syria must be resolved promptly to prevent further bloodshed and human suffering. A sandstorm hit the northern district of Akkad, causing residents to call on the authorities to collect the garbage spread by the strong winds. The national news agency says the storm hit the villages of El Bire and El Kobayat the hardest. The heavy winds blew over dumpsters, causing garbage to be strewn across villages' streets and sewers, and prompting residents to urge authorities to collect the trash as soon as possible. Akkad's inhabitants are afraid that the coming autumn rains would spread the garbage further across the district and would pollute groundwater and leave behind foul odors. Lebanon's General Security says it has arrested a Syrian national for belonging to the al-Qaeda-affiliated Nusra Front and assisting the group with logistical support. He was referred to the army for further interrogation and will eventually be tried at the military tribunal. 2 days earlier, General Security announced it had arrested 3 men, 2 Palestinians and a Syrian national, for recruiting on behalf of ISIS to carry out bombings in Lebanon and Syria. Surveillance flights over Islamic State group's positions in Syria starting Tuesday. Meanwhile, ISIS fighters have seized an oil field in a vast desert area of central Syria, where the army has been battling to regain ground from the ultra-hardline militants. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says Jazal, a medium-sized field that lies to the northwest of the Roman ruined city of Palmyra, was now under the full control of the militants. The observatory said ISIS had also seized the town of Jazal by the oil field, and the extremist group issued a statement on social media claiming to have liberated the town. Jazal, which previously produced around 2,500 barrels per day, was the last major oil field under the government control in Syria, though the regime has access to oil being pumped by Kurdish forces in the northeast. And coming up next, Europe plans to house an additional 120,000 refugees, that and more after this. Welcome back. You're watching the English newscast. Qatar has sent around 1,000 ground troops to Yemen, their first reported involvement in a Saudi-backed offensive against the dominant Houthi group. Military sources said Qatari forces were on their way to Yemen and preparing to join a new push on Houthi positions in the capital Sana'a. Though they told Reuters the soldiers had not yet entered the country. Qatari pilots have joined months of Saudi-led airstrikes on the Houthis, an Iran-allied group that seized Sana'a last year, advanced across the country and forced President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi into exile in March. The reported involvement of Qatari ground troops came amid an escalation of the conflict, days after a missile strike that killed dozens of Gulf Arab soldiers. The mother of an 18-month-old Palestinian baby burned to death in an arson attack in the occupied West Bank has herself died from injuries sustained during the attack. Reham Dawabshi, 26, who died on Sunday night in an Israeli hospital, had suffered third-degree burns to at least 80% of her body in the July 31st firebombing. Israeli settlers are accused of throwing flammable liquids and Molotov cocktails inside two homes in the village of Duma in that incident. Saad, Dawabshi's husband, died from his injuries 8 days after the attack, while 4-year-old Ali, another son of the couple, is still in hospital. Several Turkish soldiers have been killed and others wounded in a major attack in Hakkari province carried out by fighters of the Kurdistan Workers' Party known as PKK. There was no immediate official casualty toll, but the Turkish military immediately scrambled fighters' jets to strike PKK targets after Sunday's ambush in the country's southeast. The official Anatolia news agency said the attack on two military vehicles in a convoy in Daglika in Hakkari, a known PKK stronghold, had left several soldiers dead and others wounded. Reports say roadside bombs were detonated as the convoy passed, followed by a gun battle. Moving on to Europe, between 1,000 and 2,000 more migrants are expected to arrive in Munich today after an estimated 20,000 came over the weekend. After 71 people suffocated in the back of a truck abandoned on Austrian highway en route from Hungary, and as thousands headed from Budapest towards Austria on foot, Vienna had agreed with Germany to waive rules requiring refugees to register an asylum claim in the first European Union country they reach. French President François Hollande announced his country will take in 24,000 refugees over the next 2 years, while it is understood Germany will take 31,000 additional people under a European plan, which is strongly opposed by Hungary. Amazing scenes in Austria and Germany have been released as people came out to cheer, help, feed, and passionately welcome refugees arriving in their countries. The authorities are also doing all they can to provide an organized and efficient reception. Check it out.
They came with water. They came with food. Some rifled through their wardrobes to find something to give. Others remembered the children and what they might need. Young and old descended on Vienna's busiest train station with a common goal: to help thousands of refugees arriving from Hungary.
I think it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody who has time, who has energy, who is healthy enough to help, shall get here and help.
Everyone was there to help Syrians, Afghans and Iraqis fleeing war at home. Anud fled the violence in the Syrian city of Raqqa 25 days ago. She travelled with 8 other Syrians from the same city.
Look, everybody here are happy. Everybody here happy and don't afraid. Feel happy because he is in Vienna. The people here, men, women, child, everybody here help us. They give us many things: clothes, foods, bags, water, coffee. They are helping us very much.
The Austrian generosity was overwhelming, even for NGOs like Caritas. By mid-morning, it asked people to stop bringing donations to this train station. It didn't work.
I talked to some of the volunteers. They said to me, I just can't stay at home. I have to be there. We don't have a problem with refugees. We have a problem with solidarity in Europe at the moment.
Some refugees will stay. Some want to move on to Germany and other European countries. On this day, over 6,500 refugees arrived in Austria, thousands more in Germany. Many more will come, buoyed by today's welcome.
And still in Europe, thousands of farmers are protesting in Brussels to demand European Union action to counter the slumping prices they get for milk and pork. With the relentless blowing of horns, they showed their anger over high taxes and falling prices that have been exacerbated since the opening up of the milk market early this year. EU agriculture ministers are meeting in an extraordinary session to assess the crisis and look for measures to back their farmers. Some called for a reintroduction of quotas or more direct aid from their governments to pay the bills. Now back in Lebanon, in a victory for public space campaigners, the partial reopening of Hosh Beirut Park took place over the weekend. The park has been closed to the vast majority of Lebanese over the past decade over fears of littering and antisocial behavior. The reopening is in large part due to the efforts of campaign group Nahnu, which has been working for 4 years to have the park open to the public. It will now be open once a week on Saturdays. The opening of the park was facilitated by a large number of civically minded activists who had volunteered their Saturday to ensure the smooth running of the first day. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. The trash crisis and the presidential deadlock will top the agenda of the National Dialogue session this Wednesday. Parliament Speaker Nabil Vedi warns he will suspend his initiative if more than one party decides to boycott the talks. French President François Hollande says France will take in 24,000 refugees over the next 2 years and will be visiting Lebanon soon to inspect Syrian refugee camps and meet with Lebanese officials. And France will launch surveillance flights over Islamic State group positions in Syria as ISIS fighters seize an oil field in the vast desert area of Jazan. Those are your top stories for this Monday. I'm Linda Tanina. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon.
القصة هي قصة تاريخية